Reason and Revolution by Herbert Marcuse. Part 2, The Rise of Social Theory. Chapter 2.3, The Foundations of Positivism and the Rise of Sociology, the Positive Philosophy of Society, Auguste Comte. Comte severed social theory from its connection with the negative philosophy and placed it in the orbit of positivism. At the same time, he abandoned political economy as the root of social theory and made society the object of an independent science of sociology. Both steps are interconnected. Sociology became a science by renouncing the transcendent point of view of the philosophical critique. Society now was taken as a more or less definite complex of facts, governed by more or less general laws, a sphere to be treated like any other field of scientific investigation. The concepts that explain this realm were to be derived from the facts that constitute it, while the farther-reaching implications of philosophical concepts were to be excluded. The term positive was a polemical term that denoted this transformation from a philosophic theory to a scientific one. To be sure, Comte wished to elaborate an all-embracing philosophy, as the title of his principal work indicates. But it is readily visible that, in the context of positivism, philosophy means something quite different from what it meant previously, so much so that it repudiates the true content of philosophy. Philosophy positive is, in the last analysis, a contradiction in adjecto. It refers to the synthesis of all empirical knowledge ordered into a system of harmonious progress following an inexorable course. All opposition to social realities is obliterated from philosophic discussion. Comte summarizes the contrast between the positivist and the philosophic theory as follows. Positive sociology is to concern itself with the investigation of facts instead of with transcendental illusions, with useful knowledge instead of leisured contemplation, certainty instead of doubt and indecision, organization instead of negation and destruction. In all these cases, the new sociology is to tie itself to the facts of the existing social order, and though it will not reject the need for correction and improvement, it will exclude any move to overthrow or negate that order. As a result, the conceptual interest of the positive sociology is to be apologetic and justificatory, or justificatory. That's a weird word. Is that even a word? Justificatory. Okay. This has not been true of all positivist movements. At the beginning of modern philosophy, and again in the 18th century, positivism was militant and revolutionary. Its appeal to the facts then amounted to a direct attack on the religious and metaphysical conceptions that were the ideological support of the Ancien Regime. The positivist approach to history was developed then as proof positive. The positivist approach to history was developed then as proof positive that the right of man to alter the social and political forms of life accorded with the nature and progress of reason. Again, the principle of sense perception as the basis of verification was used by the French Enlightenment philosophers to protest the prevailing absolutistic system. They held that since the senses are the organon of truth, and since the gratification of the senses is the proper motivation of human action, the advancement of man's material happiness is the proper end that government and society should serve. The given form of government and society patently contradicted this end. In the last analysis, this was the fact to which the positivists of the Enlightenment made their appeal. They aimed not at a well-ordered science, but at a social and political practice, remaining rationalists in the genuine sense that they tested human practice by the standard of a truth transcendent to the given social order. The standard represented by a social ordering that did not exist as a fact but as a goal. The truth they saw, a society wherein free individuals could use their aptitudes and fulfill their needs, was not derived from any existing fact or facts, but resulted from a philosophic analysis of the historical situation, which showed an oppressive social and political system to them. The Enlightenment affirmed that reason could rule the world and men change their obsolete forms of life if they acted on the basis of their liberated knowledge and capacities. Comte's positive philosophy lays down the general framework of a social theory that is to counteract these negative tendencies of rationalism. It arrives at an ideological defense of middle-class society, and moreover, it bears the seeds of a philosophic justification of authoritarianism. The connection between positive philosophy and the irrationalism that characterized the later authoritarian ideology, ushered in with the decline of liberalism, is quite clear in Comte's writings. Hand in hand with the shackling of thought to immediate experience goes his constant widening of the realm of experience, so that it ceases to be restricted to the realm of scientific observation, but claims also various types of supersensual power. In fact, the outcome of Comte's positivism turns out to be a religious system with an elaborate cult of names, symbols, and signs. He himself expounded a positive theory of authority and became the authoritative leader of a sect of blind followers. This was the first fruit of the defamation of reason in positive philosophy. It had been the fundamental conviction of idealism that truth is not given to man from some external source, but originates in the process of interaction between thought and reality, theory and practice. The function of thought was not merely to collect, comprehend, and order facts, but also to contribute a quality that rendered such activity possible, a quality that was thus a priori to facts. A decisive portion of the human world therefore consisted, the idealists held, of elements that could not be verified by observation. Positivism repudiated this doctrine, slowly replacing the free spontaneity of thought with predominantly receptive functions. This was not merely a matter of epistemology. The idealistic idea of reason, we recall, had been intrinsically connected with the idea of freedom and had opposed any notion of a natural necessity ruling over society. Positive philosophy tended instead to equate the study of society with the study of nature, so that natural science, particularly biology, became the archetype of social theory. Social study was to be a science seeking social laws, the validity of which was to be analogous to that of physical laws. Social practice, especially the matter of changing the social system, was herewith throttled by the inexorable. Society was viewed as governed by rational laws that moved with a natural necessity. This position directly contradicted the view held by the dialectical social theory that society is irrational precisely in that it is governed by natural laws. The general dogma of the invariability of physical laws, Comte calls the true spirit of positivism. He proposes to apply this tenet to social theory as a means of freeing the latter from theology and metaphysics and giving it the status of a science. Theological and metaphysical philosophy do not hold sway today except in the system of social study. They must be excluded from this final refuge. Mainly, this will be done through the basic interpretation that social movement is necessarily subject to invariant physical laws, instead of being governed by some kind of will. The positivist repudiation of metaphysics was thus coupled with a repudiation of man's claim to alter and reorganize his social institutions in accordance with his rational will. This is the element Comte's positivism shares with the original philosophies of counter-revolution sponsored by Bonald and de Maistre. Bonald wished to demonstrate that man cannot give a constitution to religious or political society any more than he can give weight to a body or extension to matter, and that his intervention only prevents society from attaining his natural constitution. De Maistre wishes to show that human reason, or what is called philosophy, adds nothing to the happiness of states or of individuals, that creation is beyond the capacities of man, and that his reason is completely ineffectual not only for creating, but also for conserving any religious or political association. The revolutionary spirit was to be checked by spreading another teaching, that society possesses an immutable natural order to which man's will must submit. Comte also charged sociology to make secure this teaching as a means of establishing the general limits of all political action. Assent to the principle of invariant laws in society will prepare men for discipline and for obedience to the existing order, and will promote their resignation to it. Resignation is a keynote in Comte's writing, deriving directly from assent to invariable social laws. True resignation, that is, a disposition to endure necessary evils steadfastly and without any hope of compensation, therefore, can result only from a profound feeling for the invariable laws that govern the variety of natural phenomena. The positive politics that Comte advocates would tend, he declares, of its very nature to consolidate public order, even as far as incurable political evils are concerned, by developing a wise resignation. There is no doubt as to the social groups and purposes in whose behalf resignation is adduced. Rarely in the past has any philosophy urged itself forward with so strong and so overt a recommendation that it be utilized for the maintenance of prevailing authority and for the protection of vested interests from any and all revolutionary onset. Comte begins his propaganda for positivism by declaring that genuine science has no other general aim than constantly to establish and fortify the intellectual order, which is the indispensable basis of all veritable order. Order in science and order in society merge into an indivisible whole. The ultimate goal is to justify and fortify this social order. Positive philosophy is the only weapon able to combat the anarchic force of purely revolutionary principles. It alone can succeed in absorbing the current revolutionary doctrine. La cause de l'ordre, moreover, will bring even greater advantages. Positive politics will tend spontaneously to divert from the various existing powers and from all their delegates the greatly exaggerated attention accorded to them by public opinion. The consequence of this diversion will be to concentrate all social effort on primarily a moral renovation. Time and again, Comte stresses the serious and threatening dangers that attend the predominance of purely material considerations in social theory and practice. The innermost interests of his sociology are much more sharply anti-materialistic than Hegel's idealism. The principal social difficulties are today essentially not political, but moral ones, and their solution requires a change in opinions and morals rather than in institutions. Positivism is therefore urged to give aid in transforming political agitation into a philosophical crusade, which would suppress radical tendencies as, after all, incompatible with any sane conception of history. The new philosophical movement will in due time teach men that their social order stands under eternal laws against which none may transgress without punishment. According to these laws, all forms of government are provisional, which means that they will painlessly adjust themselves to the irresistible progress of mankind. Revolution under such conditions is without sense. The provisional powers that govern society, Comte argues, will no doubt find their security effectively increased through the influence of positive politics, which is alone able to imbue the people with the feeling that, in the present state of their ideas, no political change is of real importance. The lords of earth will learn also that positivism inclines to consolidate all power in the hands of those who possess this power, whoever they may be. Comte becomes even more outspoken. He denounces the strange and extremely dangerous theories and efforts that are directed against the prevailing property order. These erect an absurd utopia. Certainly it is necessary to improve the condition of the lower classes, but this must be done without deranging class barriers and without disturbing the indispensable economic order. On this point, too, positivism offers a testimonial to itself. It promises to ensure the ruling classes against every anarchistic invasion and to show the way to a proper treatment of the mass. Outlining the meaning of the term positive in his philosophy, Comte summarizes the grounds for his recommendation of himself to the cause de l'ordre by stressing that his philosophy is of its very nature destined not to destroy but to organize, and that it will never pronounce an absolute negation. We have devoted considerable space to the social and political role of Comte's sociology because the subsequent development of positivism has obliterated the strong connection between the social and methodological principles. We now raise the question, which of its principles makes positive philosophy the adequate guardian and defender of the existing order? In drawing our contrast between the positivist spirit of the Enlightenment and later positivist views, we have already pointed to the latter's negation of metaphysics and to the subordination of imagination to observation, and we have shown that these signified a tendency to acquiesce in the given. All scientific concepts were to be subordinated to the facts. The former were merely to make manifest the real connections among the latter. Facts and their connections represented an inexorable order comprising social as well as natural phenomena. The laws positivist science discovered and that distinguished it from empiricism were positive also in the sense that they affirmed the prevailing order as a basis for denying the need to construct a new one. Not that they excluded reform and change. On the contrary, the idea of progress loomed large in the sociology of Comte. But the laws of progress were part of the machinery of the given order, so that the latter progressed smoothly to a higher stage without having to be destroyed first. Comte had little difficulty in arriving at this result, for he saw the different stages of historical development as stages of a philosophic movement, rather than of a social process. Comte's law of 3 stages illustrates this quite clearly. History, he says, takes the inevitable path of first theological rule, then metaphysical rule, and finally positivist rule. God damn it, Obi. This conception, This conception permitted Comte to come forward as a brave warrior against the Ancien Régime at a time when the Ancien Régime had long been broken and the middle class had long consolidated its social and economic power. Comte interpreted the Ancien Régime primarily as the vestige of theological and metaphysical ideas in science. Observation instead of speculation means in Comte's sociology an emphasis on order in place of any rupture in the order. It means the authority of natural laws in place of free action, unification in place of disorder. The idea of order, so basic to Comte's positivism, has a totalitarian content in its social as well as methodological meaning. The methodological emphasis was on the idea of a unified science, the same idea that dominates recent developments in positivism. Comte wanted to found his philosophy on a system of universally recognized principles that will draw their ultimate legitimacy solely from the voluntary assent by which the public will confirm them to be the result of perfectly free discussion. The public, just as in neo-positivism, turns out to be a forum of scientists who have the necessary equipment of knowledge and training. Social questions, because of their complicated nature, must be handled by a small group of an intellectual elite. In this way, the most vital issues that are of great moment to all are withdrawn from the arena of social struggle and bottled for investigation in some field of specialized scientific study. Unification is a matter of agreement among scientists whose efforts along this line will sooner or later yield a permanent and definite state of intellectual unity. All the sciences will be poured into the same crucible and fused into a well-ordered scheme. All concepts will be put to the test of one and the same fundamental method until in the end they issue forth ordered in a rational sequence of uniform laws. Positivism thus will be systematized the whole... Positivism will... Positivism thus will systematize the whole of our conceptions. Okay, the positivist idea of order refers to an ensemble of laws entirely different from the ensemble of dialectical laws. The former are essentially affirmatory and construct a stable order, the latter essentially negative and destructive of stability. The former see society as a realm of natural harmony, the latter as a system of antagonisms. The notion of natural laws entails at once the corresponding idea of a spontaneous order, which is always coupled with the notion of some harmony. Positivist sociology is basically Positivist sociology is basically social statics, quite in keeping with the positivist doctrine that there is a true and permanent harmony between the various existential conditions in society. The harmony prevails, and because it does so, the thing to do is contemplate the order for the purpose of correcting it conveniently, but not and nowhere to create it. A closer scrutiny of Comte's laws of social statics discloses their amazing abstractness and poverty. They center about two propositions. First, men need to work for their happiness. Second, all social actions show that they are overwhelmingly motivated by selfish interests. The principal task of positivist political science is to strike the right balance between the different kinds of work to be done and the skillful employment of self-interest for the common good. In this connection, Comte stresses the need for strong authority. In the intellectual, no less than in the material order, men find above all the indispensable need for some supreme directing hand capable of sustaining their continuous activity by rallying and fixing their spontaneous efforts. When positivism reaches its dominant position in the world, in the last stage of human progress, it changes hitherto existing forms of authority, but it does not by any means abolish authority itself. Comte outlines a positive theory of authority, envisaging a society with all its activity based on the consent of individual wills. The liberalist tinge of this picture is shaded over, however. The instinct to submit triumphs, as the founder of positivist sociology renders a paean to obedience and leadership. How sweet it is to obey when we can enjoy the happiness of being conveniently discharged by sage and worthy leaders from the pressing responsibility of a general direction of our conduct. Happiness in the shelter of a strong arm, the attitude so characteristic today in fascist societies, makes juncture with the positivist ideal of certainty. Submission to an all-powerful authority provides the highest degree of security. Perfect certainty of theory and practice, Comte claims, is one of the basic attainments of positivist method. The idea of certainty did not, of course, emerge with positive philosophy, but had been a strong feature of rationalism ever since Descartes. Positivism did, however, reinterpret its meaning and function. As we have indicated, rationalism asserted that the ground of theoretical and practical certainty was the freedom of the thinking subject. On this foundation, it constructed a universe that was rational precisely to the extent that it was dominated by the intellectual and practical power of the individual. Truth sprang from the subject, and the imprint of subjectivity was upon it whatever objective form it took. The world was real to the extent that it conformed to the subject's rational autonomy. Positivism shifts the source of certainty from the subject of thought to the subject of perception. Scientific observation yields certainty here. The spontaneous functions of thought recede, while its receptive and passive functions gain predominance. Comte's sociology, by virtue of the concept of order, is essentially social statics. It is also social dynamics, by virtue of the concept of progress. The relation between the two basic concepts Comte has often explained. Order is the fundamental condition of progress, and all progress ultimately tends to consolidate order. The principal reason for the fact that social antagonisms still prevail is that the idea of order and that of progress are still separated, a condition which has made it possible for anarchist revolutionaries to usurp the latter idea. Positive philosophy aims to reconcile order and progress, to achieve a common satisfaction of the need for order and the need for progress. This it can do by showing that progress is in itself order, not revolution, but evolution. His anti-materialistic interpretation of history facilitated Comte's undertaking. He retained the Enlightenment conception that progress is primarily intellectual progress, the continuous advance of positive knowledge. He removed from the Enlightenment conception as much of its material content as he could, thus adhering to his promise to substitute an immense intellectual movement for a sterile political agitation. Servant of the preeminent, need to safeguard the existing order. The idea of progress stands in the way of physical, moral, and intellectual development, except along lines that the given system of circumstances permits. Comte's idea of progress excludes revolution. The total transformation of the given system of circumstances. Historical development becomes nothing more than a harmonious evolution of the social order under perennial natural laws. Dynamic sociology is to present the mechanics of this evolution. Its outlook is essentially to conceive each state of society as the necessary result of the preceding one and the indispensable motor of the succeeding one. Social dynamics deals with the laws governing this continuity. In other words, the laws of succession, whereas social statics treats of the laws of coexistence. The former makes for the true theory of progress, the latter the true theory of order. progress is equated with a persistent growth of intellectual culture in history. The fundamental law of social dynamics is that increasing power accrues to those organic faculties by which man is differentiated in nature from lower organic beings, namely intelligence and sociability. As civilization proceeds, it comes closer and closer to exhibiting the nature of mankind in the concrete. The highest grade of civilization is the one most in conformity with nature. Historical progress is a natural process and is, as such, governed by natural laws. Progress is order. The process of making social theory compatible with existing conditions is not complete as far as we have developed it. All elements that would transcend or point beyond the validity of the given matters of fact have yet to be excluded. This requires that social theory be made relativistic. The last decisive aspect of positivism, Comte states, as we would expect, is its tendency everywhere to substitute the relative for the absolute. From this irrevocable predominance of the relativist point of view, he derives his basic view that social development has a naturally harmonious character. Every historical stage of society is as perfect as the corresponding age of humanity and system of circumstance permit. As the corresponding age of humanity and system of okay. A natural harmony prevails not only among the coexisting parts of the social scheme, but also between the potentialities of mankind revealed therein and the realization of these. According to Comte, relativism is inseparable from the conception that sociology is an exact science dealing with the invariant laws of social statics and dynamics. These laws are to be discovered only by scientific observation, which in turn requires a constant progress in scientific technique to cope with the highly complicated phenomena it has to organize. The attainment of complete knowledge coincides with the completion of scientific progress itself. Prior to such perfection, all knowledge and truth are inevitably partial and relative to the attained level of intellectual development. So far, Comte's relativism is merely methodological, based on a necessary inadequacy in the methods of observation. Owing to the fact, however, that social development is interpreted primarily as intellectual development, his relativism posits a pre-established harmony between the subjective side of sociology, the method, and the objective, the content. All social forms and institutions, as we have mentioned, are provisional in the sense that, as intellectual culture advances, they will pass into others that will correspond with intellectual capacities of an advanced type. Their provisional character, though a sign of their imperfection, is at the same time the mark of their relative truth. The concepts of positivism are relativistic, because all reality is relative. Science, to Comte, is the field of theoretical relativism, and the latter the area from which value judgments are excluded. Positivist sociology neither admires nor condemns political facts, but looks upon them as simple objects of observation. When sociology becomes a positivist science, it is divorced from any concern with the value of a given social form. Man's quest for happiness is not a scientific problem, nor is the question of the best possible fulfillment for his desires and talents. Comte boasts that he can easily treat the whole realm of social physics without once using the word perfection, which is replaced forever by the purely scientific term development. Each historical level represents a higher stage of development than the one preceding, by force of the fact that the latter is the necessary product of the earlier one and contains the later is the necessary product of the earlier one and contains a plus of experience and new knowledge. Comte holds, however, that his concept of development does not exclude perfection. The essential conditions of men and their capacities have improved with social development. This is incontestable, but the improvement of capacities takes place primarily in science, art, morals, and such, all of which, like the improvement in social conditions, move gradually within convenient limits. Accordingly, revolutionary efforts for a new order of society have no place in the scheme. They can be dispensed with. The vain search for better government is not necessary, for each established governmental form has its relative right to be disputed only by those taking an absolutist point of view, which is false per definitionem. Comte's relativism thus terminates in the positive theory of authority. Comte's reverence for established authority was easily compatible with all-around tolerance. Both attitudes hold equally in this brand of scientific relativism. There is no room for condemnation. Without the slightest alteration of its proper principles, positivism can do exact and philosophical justice to all prevalent doctrines, a virtue that will make it acceptable to all the different existing parties. The idea of tolerance had changed its content and function as positivism developed. The French enlighteners who fought the absolute state gave no relativist framework to their demand for tolerance, but asserted that demand is part of their general effort to establish a better form of government, better in precisely the sense Comte repudiates. Tolerance did not mean justice to all existing parties. It meant, in fact, the abolition of one of the most influential of parties, that of the clergy, allied with the feudal nobility, which was using intolerance as an instrument for domination. When Comte came on the scene, his tolerance was not a slogan for opponents of the existing order, but for the opponents of these. As the concept of progress was formalized, tolerance was detached from a standard that had given it content in the 18th century. Earlier, the positivist standard had been a new society, while tolerance had been equivalent to intolerance towards those who opposed that standard. The formalized concept of tolerance, on the other hand, amounted to tolerating the forces of reaction and regress as well. The need for this kind of toleration resulted from the fact that all standards that go beyond given realities had been renounced, standards that in Comte's eyes were akin to those seeking an absolute. In a philosophy that justified the prevailing social system, the cry of toleration became increasingly useful to the beneficiaries of the system. Comte, however, does not treat all parties equally. He says many times that there is an essential affinity between positivism and one large social group, the proletariat. Proletarians have an ideal disposition to positivism. Comte has an entire section in the Système de Politique Positive dedicated to the proposition that the new philosophers will find their most energetic allies among our proletarians. The fact of the proletariat worried Comte's sociology as well as it did its antithesis, the Marxian critique. There could be no positive theory of civil society unless the fact of the proletariat could be reconciled with the harmonious order of progress it so patently contradicts. For if the proletariat is the foundational class in civil society, the laws of this society's advance are the laws of its destruction, and the theory of society must be a negative one. Sociology must, in the face of this, represent a refutation of the dialectical thesis that accumulation of wealth takes place alongside an intensification of poverty. Comte regarded the latter thesis as a sinister and immoral prejudice, one that positivism had to eradicate if it would maintain the industrial discipline the society needs in order to function. Comte held that the theory and practice of liberalism could not safeguard discipline. The vain and irrational disposition to allow for only that degree of order that comes of itself, that is, that comes through the free play of economic forces, amounts to a solemn resignation of social practice in the face of every real emergency in the social process. Comte's belief in the necessary laws of progress did not exclude practical efforts in the direction of such social reform as would remove any obstacles in the path of these laws. The positivist program of social reform foreshadows liberalism's turn into authoritarianism. In contrast to Hegel, whose philosophy showed a similar tendency, Comte slurred over the fact that the turn is made necessary because of the antagonistic structure of civil society. Classes in conflict, he held, are but vestiges of an obsolete regime, soon to be removed by positivism, without any threat to the fundamental institution of property. The rule of positivism, Comte says, will improve the condition of the proletariat, first in education and second through the creation of work. The vision entails an all-embracing hierarchic state governed by a cultural elite composed of all social groups and permeated by a new morality that unites all diverse interests into a real whole. Notwithstanding the many declarations that this hierarchy will derive its authority from the free consent of its members, Comte's state resembles in many respects the modern authoritarian state. We find, for example, that there is to be a spontaneous union of the brain and the hand. Obviously, regulation from above plays an important part in the establishment of such a union. Comte makes the matter more explicit. He states that industrial development has already reached a point at which it becomes necessary to regulate the relation between entrepreneur and worker toward an indispensable harmony that is no longer sufficiently guaranteed in the free natural antagonism between them. The act of combining entrepreneurs and workers, we are assured, is by no means intended as a step toward abolishing the inevitably inferior position of the worker. The latter's activity, Comte holds, is naturally less extensive and less responsible than that of the entrepreneur. Society is a positive hierarchy, and submission to the social stratification is indispensable to the life of the whole. Consequently, the new morality is to be primarily one of duty to the whole. The justified claims of the proletariat become duties too. The worker will receive first education and then work. Comte does not elaborate on this work creation program, but does speak of a system in which all private functions become public ones, so that every activity is organized and exercised as a public service. This nationalization of labor has nothing to do, of course, with socialism. Comte stresses that in the positive order, the various public enterprises can, to an increasing extent, be entrusted to private industry, provided that such administrative change does not tamper with the necessary discipline. He refers in this connection to an agency that has become increasingly important in maintaining positive order, the army. His effort to do justice to all social groups alike prompts him to recommend his philosophy to the military class, with the reminder that positivism, though it approves of the slow disappearance of military action, directly justifies the important provisional function of the army in the necessary maintenance of the material order. Because of the grave disturbances to which the social system is prone, the army has the increasingly essential task of participating actively to maintain the constancy of public order. As national wars disappear, we shall witness that the army will more and more be entrusted with the social mission of a great political gendarmerie. In one decisive aspect, however, Comte's system retains the emancipatory function of Western philosophy, for it tends to bridge the gulf between isolated individuals and to unite them in a real universal. We have attempted to show how the positivist method engendered the quest for unification, and we have stressed its negative implications. But the idea of a universal positive order drove Comte beyond the empty conception of a unified science and the oppressive vision of a government of positive high priests. There is still another universality prevalent in Comte's system, that of society. It emerges as the one arena in which man acts out his historical life, and by the same token it becomes the only object of social theory. The individual plays almost no part in Comte's sociology. He is entirely absorbed by society, and the state is a mere byproduct of the inexorable laws that govern the social process. On this point, Comte's sociology transcends the limits of Hegel's political philosophy. The positive theory of society sees no reason for confining human development within the boundaries of sovereign national states. Its idea of a universal order is consummated only through the union of all individuals in mankind, and the positivist destruction of obsolete theological and metaphysical standards comes to fruition in the recognition of humanity as the être suprême. Humanity, not the state, is the real universal. Nay, it is the only reality. It is the only entity that, in the age of mankind's maturity, is worthy of religious reverence. The great conception of humanity will irrevocably eliminate that of God. It is as if Comte had tried, with the idea of humanity, to make amends for the oppressive atmosphere in which his positivist sociology moved.